5 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, or rice. 3 to 5 of vegetables and 4 fruits is best. Their antioxidants and fiber help you to digest.
There are two important terms you should know for this video. One of them is control and the other one is prevention. When we talk about controlling disease, what we mean is that the disease itself doesn't spread once it's infected a population. So for example, if one person in a population has a disease, then if we control the disease, what we want to make sure is that the disease doesn't spread from one person to the next, right? So we want to make sure that this doesn't happen. We don't want it to spread from one person to the next. We're trying to control the spread of the disease. Now prevention means that we don't have anyone that has the disease in the first place. We prevent anyone from getting sick in the first place. So the disease, a bacteria, whatever it is that caused disease is here, but it's going to be killed before it causes disease. So prevention, we don't have anyone that has disease. Whereas control means someone might have the disease, but if we control it, that means no one else will be infected. Right? So these are the two terms you need to know. And throughout the last couple of videos, we've discussed two things which help us both control and prevent disease. That are your vaccines. These vaccines make sure that if someone's infected, if you vaccinate someone else, anyone that's vaccinated won't have the disease. So anyone who's vaccinated will be prevented from having the disease because they have a vaccine against the disease. So vaccines help prevent. And quarantine both helps to control and prevent disease. So we talked about quarantine in the last couple of videos. Quarantine is the use of isolation. Anything which is might cause disease is isolated and not allowed to actually enter. So I meant to write control and prevent, not control and prevent, and not control and control. But we've got vaccines in quarantine, but we'll go over a couple of other things as well, because the point itself says explain how one of the following strategies has controlled and/or prevented disease. So that's why we need to know what control and prevention means. So we're going to talk about public health programs, pesticides, and genetic engineering. Remember the dot point says explain how one of the following. So really you should only choose one of them, but might be good to know all of them anyway. And we need to explain how these programs have helped the prevention and the control of disease. The first one, we're going to talk about the first one, were the public health programs. Now, there are 3 different types of public health programs, and I'm going to go over each of them. So these are the 3 different types. And what these public health programs do, they're usually done by the government or a non-government agency, and they are focused on everyone. So it's kind of not only the doctor gives you medication that's just for yourself. These public health programs try to make sure everyone stays healthy, more or less, right? They're for the public. And there are environmental, population-based ones, and pathogen-based ones. We'll talk about each of those. For the environment, it refers to trying to keep the environment clean to make sure we can prevent disease that way. So, for example, we have garbage disposal. That's something that we give to everyone, and that makes sure that the garbage is removed, and it allows us to make sure that if there's maybe a pathogen in your garbage, that garbage is removed. If there's a pathogen in your garbage, that pathogen is removed when the garbage is being disposed of. We also have clean water supplies in all our major cities, and generally in most of Australia, and that allows us to make sure our water is clean, and that means everyone is prevented from becoming sick because we've got clean water, there's no pathogens inside. I mentioned earlier, quarantine is also a environmental based one. It's just trying to change the environment to not allow certain things in that could cause disease. That's how we prevent and control disease through quarantine. Pollution monitoring, that should be straightforward. We just try to make sure we minimize pollution, because pollution itself can cause disease, so if we minimize it, it'll cause less disease. We've got food and hygiene inspection. Again, if we have food poisoning, for example, because of unhygienic practices, that means we can cause disease to anyone who gets that food. In restaurants, for example, but because we have these inspections, that means more or less most restaurants adhere to good food and hygiene practices. We also have the OHS, and that's to do with the environment being safe, your workplace being safe, and the chance of injury being reduced, right? So these are all environment. These are all focusing on changing the environment to make sure we can prevent and control disease that way. The next one is population-based. And what we mean by that is we've got certain campaigns which try to encourage you to behave differently, right? So you as an individual. For example, we've got the slip, slop, and slap campaigns. Now these are, on your television, on posters, and it's trying to encourage you to wear protective clothing and use sunscreen, not scream, to help prevent skin cancer, for example, right? So that's a public campaign which is based on, it's talking to you, it's population based. We've also got the quit campaign. Again, through advertisement, on your cigarettes, we have these pictures which tell you the horrors of smoking, and they try to prevent and control lung cancer, so they're trying to reduce the occurrence of lung cancer that way. We've got early detection programs. Again, these are programs that encourage you to check, for example, if you're a woman, to check your breast to make sure you don't have any lumps, because that might be breast cancer, right? So they're trying to detect certain diseases early before it gets any worse, for example, cancer. We've got AIDS awareness campaigns. Again, these are not mostly in Australia, but in parts of Asia and Africa, where people are encouraged to use protection, for example, to make sure AIDS doesn't spread. And these are just, again, these are there to let everyone know what they can do to reduce the risk of, to control and prevent these different types of diseases. We've got heart disease campaigns. Again, these are to do with, healthy eating, doing exercise to help you prevent getting heart disease. And it's usually television ads and posters and stuff like that. We've got the different types of obesity campaigns. Again, healthy eating, promoting exercise. You see them posters, television ads. You might even have people call you every now and then. All of these are population-based campaigns. They're trying to talk to you, but not directly for a doctor meeting, but through advertisements and everything else. We've got the Pathogen public health programs. These are the third one. These are directly trying to make sure that a pathogen doesn't spread. And for example, we have quarantine procedures for people that have certain diseases. For example, this person has chickenpox. If you have chickenpox, you more or less have to be put into quarantine. Right? So that's one way we can make sure that pathogens don't spread, which means everyone else is at low risk. We can prevent and control disease through these different types of measures. Quarantine of people who have chickenpox, for example. We also have laws that require notification for certain people who have certain diseases. So, for example, anyone who has AIDS has to notify the authority, and that's important because, for example, if you were to donate blood and you have AIDS, then this database would tell you, or would tell the person that's not acceptable because you can't donate blood with AIDS, because that means you might spread it to someone else. So that's how we can prevent the spread of AIDS for everyone that has it being notified, and everyone, like the government being notified that someone has the disease, and that means we can have these measures in place to make sure it doesn't spread. These were the three different types of public health programs. That's the first point. The second point is pesticides. And by the way, one of the reasons why I do often go through things quite quickly is just because I don't want to have it be too long. So I would love to do 2-hour videos, but I'm pretty sure you guys don't want that. So I try to keep it as short as possible. We've got the pesticides. These are chemicals that kill pests. So for example, your herbicides, your insecticides, and your fungicides. So all of these are example of pesticides, right? These are all pesticides. Again, pesticides are just chemicals that are designed to kill pests. So for example, when you go into your kitchen cabinet and you bring out that spray that kills cockroaches, that's a pesticide. Kills a pest because a cockroach is considered to be a pest. Now the insecticides, these are ones which kill insects, a form of pesticide. We have, for example, DDT. Now what DDT does, it kills mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes are really good to kill because often these mosquitoes can cause, for example, malaria. And malaria is obviously a pretty bad disease. So these mosquitoes act as a vector. Remember, a vector was one that carries an actual disease. If we kill the mosquito, that means the Plasmodium protozoa won't be able to infect us, which means we can eliminate malaria. So that's how, for example, insecticide can be used to help us prevent the spread of disease by killing the vector, in this case mosquito. And the example was DDT. And you can see here it's being spread a lot. And the reason why it's a black and white picture is because DDT is actually really poisonous. We didn't know it back then, but we know it now, which means we can more or less stop using DDT because it's quite dangerous for us and for the environment but back then people didn't know. So it was used. Now we do use different types of pesticides still to kill mosquitoes, but we don't use DDT anymore. We use different types. Now, also we use it to kill apophyte. That's a different type of worm. And these worms are also a vector. So they carry a disease. And they carry a disease which causes something called potato leaf curl disease, which is really problematic. If your potatoes have that disease, then obviously your potato crop will be gone. So these different types of chemicals get used to kill. This is a worm. In this case, it kills the worm. The worm is a vector for a disease. So if we kill the worm, that means we've prevented the disease from occurring. That means we save our potatoes. And that is a problem. Apophytes are a problem in Australia, so we use different types of insecticides to kill them. Now, fungicides are also used, for example, to kill fungus. Remember I mentioned a couple of years back that there are fungal infections. These fungal infections can infect humans, but often when we use fungicides, we don't usually use them on humans or to kill human bacteria that infect humans, but we use them to prevent plant bacteria. So fungal infections on plants are usually quite problematic. They will cause the plant to die. So by spraying this fungicide, we kill the actual fungus directly, and that fungus won't be able to cause the disease. So either we kill the vector using, for example, insecticides, or we kill the pathogen directly. In this case, we're killing the pathogen directly for using, for example, a fungicide. And just to clarify what a herbicide is something that kills, the word herb refers to a plant-based, so it's used to kill weeds. So weeds are obviously the different types of grassy stuff which we don't want. Right? But pesticides are designed to kill, in many cases, insects or fungi, which the insects are often vectors for different types of disease, and the fungi can often cause disease, which means if we kill them, then we prevent and control the spread of disease. So that's how we can use pesticides to help control and prevent the spread of disease. And the last one is genetic engineering. So it says genetic engineering to produce disease-resistant plants and animals. Now, we talked about genetic engineering in the last module, the Blueprint of Life module, towards the end of it. And we said that, for example, we can produce transgenic species. For anyone who doesn't remember or hasn't done the last module yet, transgenic species are species where we take genes from one species and put it into another one. So put it into a different one. And the example is this one here. This is our BT crop. This is a crop. So crop means, again, crop is just, for example, corn, wheat, anything that we use often to make our food, we call it crop. Now, this is a corn crop. And what we do is we have a bacteria here. So we have the Bacillus thuringiensis bacteria. And what we do is we take a part of a gene from this bacteria. This gene here, this is the BT gene. We take it from the bacteria and put it inside the crop, so inside the corn. So this gene here is now inside the crop. And that means, that's really good, because what this actual gene does is it makes the actual crop resistant to pests. So here you can see this, without the gene, this worm here is going to have a field day. It's just going to be able to eat the corn without a problem. But because this is now a BT crop, so it has this BT gene inside of it, it's basically resistant to pests. And if this worm were to try to eat it, then it would die because of the actual extra gene which produces a protein which kills the pests. Right? So if we have this, we don't need to use pesticides so much, which is quite good because of pesticide resistance. But yeah, that's one way of making in this case, this crop here, so the actual corn has genes from both the corn and the bacteria. That's why it's called a transgenic species. It has genes from two species, from the bacteria species and from the corn species. So BT crop is one example. we also have, we're trying to, so this is it for a animal, so sorry, for a plant. So it says genetic engineering to produce disease-resistant plants. So the BT crop is an example of the plant, and the example of the animal is we're trying to make a mastis-resistant cattle. What mastis is usually a bacteria, and as you can see, the bacteria here has infected sort of the mammary gland of the cow, which means it's not going to be able to produce milk, and it's going to suffer a lot as well. It's going to be quite in pain. If we can somehow make it resistant, if we can get a certain gene into this cow, so again make it transgenic species, get a gene from a different type of species which is resistant to mastis, put it into the cattle, then we can produce a mastis-resistant cattle, and that means that it won't have these infections. Now, we haven't developed this yet. We're still trying to develop that, but this would be an example of an animal that is resistant to disease because of genetic engineering. Right? Genetic engineering is changing the genetic makeup. In this case, it would have had a gene added to it to make it resistant. Now, also, so this is what we just talked about, transgenic species, but also changing the genetic makeup can even be done to humans, right? So, for example, in the future, we have different types of diseases. So we talked about cystic fibrosis a couple of videos back. Cystic fibrosis is if you have a mutation in a gene that produces a protein which malfunctions. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease. We can't fix it yet, but in future what we can do is we can actually correct that gene, we can repair the gene, and if we can repair the gene, we can change the genetic makeup of that individual, repair the gene. That means cystic fibrosis will not be there, it will be gone. And then we've also helped prevent the spread of disease by fixing a genetic sort of mutation. Right? So that's for humans, that's not yet, but it's the future. It'll happen in the future. And again, this video is taking too long. I think I'll just pass on talking about the insulin-producing bacteria. But for genetic engineering, you should know it's to do with changing the genetic makeup of a species. And this can be done to make plant-resistant crops, such as BT crops, so plant-resistant to resistant plants to disease. This could be the BT crop, and in future we can also make animals that are resistant to disease, such as the mastis-resistant cattle. And we can also make humans that we can change the genetic makeup by removing genetic diseases, such as cystic fibrosis, for example. Right, so that's how we can prevent the spread of disease using these different types of genetic engineering. So I'm going to go back to the other two, just to summarize. So for the public health programs, we've got the environmental, population, and pathogen-based ones. And all of these are the ones we mentioned earlier. They're there to help the spread of disease. Sorry. My throat is killing me. They're not there to help spread disease, they're there to help prevent the spread of disease. And we've got the pesticides, which are there to kill pests. And if they kill these pests, for example, your fungi or your mosquitoes or your epiphytes, then we can also help prevent the spread of disease by killing either the vector that causes the disease, such as malaria, and the mosquito being the vector, or we can kill a fungus which would directly cause a disease in, for example, plants, using fungicides. But one of the problems when it comes to pesticides is pesticide resistance. So you should also know about that, because they're chemicals. Pesticide resistant. Over time, the actual organisms will become more and more resistant to these pesticides, which means they become less and less effective. Which is why we need to have more than just only the pesticides that we can use, and also many pesticides can also be dangerous as well. So pesticides are quite useful, but they have the limits. But I hope that was useful. Yeah, I'm losing my voice, so I better stop.
Thank you for watching.